A little while ago, Microsoft introduced their very first desktop computer that they have ever made, the Microsoft Surface Studio. And I didn't care. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you out there who are also gamers probably didn't care as well, because while this was a very neat looking computer, the specs in it were kind of similar to stuff you'd find off of a pretty good laptop. And the video card itself is something that won't be able to run at these really high resolutions that really nice screen is capable of, but it'll be able to run games somewhere around the mid to high settings at a pretty decent frame rate. But this is not the stuff I was interested in. What I was interested in was the fact that you had one big touchscreen, something I've never seen before in any other computer. Now, of course, there have been HP Touch Smart monitors and stuff like that, but to have a computer that allowed you to take the whole screen and lower it down on the table like it's a drafting table, see, that was new to me. And I thought there would be a whole bunch of games out there to play. But are there? Let's take a look. The first thing I noticed when looking at this screen is that it's not really a widescreen monitor or even a 4x3 monitor. It's a 3x2 aspect ratio monitor, meaning that you might have some problems with certain games' compatibilities. Now look, when it comes to resolutions, there's a lot of games out there that can choose a whole variety of them, but aspect ratios, that becomes a problem. Many older games only use 4x3 and many new games do utilize widescreen like 16:9 and 16:10, but 3x2 is just not really supported by a lot of things. So games may run, but they might actually cut things out of the screen, or if you're very lucky, the whole aspect ratio will kind of shift down and be kind of letterboxed. A lot of games do run like this, but it's something you should be aware of when you're getting into gaming with this thing. But right off the bat, you're not going to have a lot of problems with virtually any game you find off the Windows Store. See, the Windows Store is Microsoft's own kind of app store that they have built into Windows 10, so you'll be able to find a lot of games. And the games they do have that utilize this whole Surface Studio stuff, well, they're pretty cool. That is, if you find things like Minesweeper cool, because they've got that. They also have Solitaire, and they've got Sudoku, and a whole bunch of stuff like that, older style games. Now, why I'm even bothering talking about these games, which for many hardcore gamers would find very boring, I gotta say that this is kind of weird because these games are a little bit more interesting to play when you're playing them on such a large touchscreen. I don't even know how to really kind of explain this experience with you guys, but even though I've played Solitaire a bunch of times back on Windows 95 and 98 and older Windows operating systems, to play it on a screen like this, where you're touching and grabbing cards and moving them all over the place, it's got this very tactile experience that kind of makes it a little bit more fun. Yes, you could just go out and get an actual deck of cards and play Solitaire like that, but the screen wouldn't blow up when you won. At least I really hope you don't play Solitaire with explosives. Regardless though, there are a lot of really basic touchscreen games that Microsoft does provide that are really nice to play, especially when you've got such a large real estate to deal with in front of you. But because it is the Windows Store, it's not just limited to stuff like that. You also have a couple of cross-platform Xbox games and some classic games that do run on here quite well, especially a couple of key games that you can get on Microsoft's Xbox platform right now, like Forza Horizon 3. Now, Forza Horizon 3 runs great on the system. It's actually very fine, and I would have to say it probably runs a little bit better than it does on the original Xbox One version of the game, even with a higher frame rate and all that stuff. But what you're not getting are touchscreen controls, so that's very unfortunate. Now, another thing you can get with this computer is the Microsoft Dial, which is this little metal thing that you can kind of move around and use to interact with a bunch of programs. And not any of the games I tried utilized this dial. The first thing I tried to do is actually get that dial to be some kind of steering wheel with Forza, but there simply isn't a way I could find to make it to work. The next thing I thought was, hey, what if I installed MAME on this system and used the dial to play a whole bunch of really classic games like, I don't know, Arkanoid? Well, unfortunately, Arkanoid doesn't work, not even Pong. Nothing works with this dial when it comes to video games. Any of the built-in software that Microsoft's been using for Paint and stuff, yeah, that will work. But aside from that, it's just kind of a non-function. Now, like I said earlier, you can play Sudoku on here, or Crossword, or a bunch of other games that require the use of the Microsoft Surface Pen. Now, this pen works really well and identifies all the letters and the words that you're writing into those little squares in the games. And if you screw up, you can turn the pen around just like an original pencil and erase the screen, and it works really naturally. Unfortunately, for me, I've got awful penmanship, so sometimes it wasn't able to identify what letter or what number I was putting in, and that kind of got annoying once in a while. But let's forget about everything I just talked about and talk about the one game you should be playing if you're downloading any game at all from the Microsoft Store, and that would be Minecraft. Minecraft works amazing with the touchscreen. You can play the entire game without ever having to use the mouse and keyboard. But let me make this very clear. I believe the version they're using here was originally made for something like the Surface tablet or even one of the Surface laptops, something that's a little bit smaller to use. With a screen this big, it's just kind of awkward. You feel like you're kind of doing these weird claw hand motions to get everything to work. But if you can use it properly and you figure out how to actually make it work for you, you can build things pretty quickly because really it's a touchscreen where you can just drop blocks wherever you want. And for Minecraft players, you might find this to be a very big advantage, especially if you're looking to just kind of build things instead of actually playing the game like it's an adventure game. But that's all up to you. You might really enjoy playing Minecraft on a touchscreen, but personally, I still enjoy playing it on a mouse and keyboard or even a controller. But let's stop talking about the Windows Store right now, and let's talk about other digital stores that you can find games on PC, like Steam or Battle.net or the Blizzard app, whatever they're calling it now. There are a ton of other games online right now that you can play that you might find might be a little bit more interesting to play, especially with a touchscreen this big. For instance, you can play StarCraft. I'm talking about StarCraft 2, which you can also do to varying degrees of difficulty. I'm talking about the original StarCraft, which is a free-to-download game right now. You can play the entire game with this touchscreen, and it does work. But it's got issues. It's not exactly as fast as using a mouse and a keyboard setup, so sometimes when you want to register a move or you want somebody to attack somebody else, it doesn't always work 100%. This is a very bare bones experience, but it's something I really wanted to try because I've always personally believed that RTS games would benefit from using a touchscreen interface. And there have been games in the past that were made to use touchscreens, and they were essentially RTSs, like Ruse. But that comes to one of my big problems that I never thought I would experience with the Surface. There are games out there that you would assume would work really well with this touchscreen that simply won't, and Ruse is one of them. Ruse originally was designed with the Surface in mind, at least the really old Surface that they made, which was this huge table concept, but that was years and years ago. And the modern version of Ruse that you can get on Steam and on the Uplay store, well, that game doesn't actually use touchscreen interfaces. At least if it does, you can't get it to work with the Surface, no matter what you try. I tried modifying the game code to enable it and stuff, but it just wouldn't work, which was really unfortunate because this computer is capable of running Ruse at some pretty decent settings, and with the ability to use the touchscreen, I think that game would be even more fun to play. But you're not going to be able to get that experience. So games like StarCraft, things that use the mouse input, they tend to work a little bit better, but not as good as using a mouse. And there's a bunch of other games like point-and-click action-adventure games and stuff like that that do work with the touchscreen, but unfortunately, the older the point-and-click game is, the less likelier it is to work. See, back in the old days when they made these games, they used very small resolutions. So when you go to play it on a modern touchscreen, the screen is being blown up from a very small resolution to whatever the weird aspect ratio and resolution this screen is playing at. So unfortunately, the touchscreen just doesn't interface well with those older games. So essentially, every old touchscreen game you can possibly think of won't work with this screen. What you will find though is that modern touchscreen games tend to work very well as long as they don't rely heavily on right clicks, because as soon as you're doing that, well, this screen doesn't really have a way to utilize a right click. There's no double tapping on the screen or anything like that. The only way to get a right click to work is to hold something down very still and wait for the right click to activate, which in some games works, but in, I want to say, 80% of the games I played, it simply just wasn't something that was viable. There are a lot of modern video games out there that don't utilize touchscreens, but believe it or not, there's quite a few out there that do, and things you would probably assume would, like Hearthstone. Now, Hearthstone is really fun to play on PC or on a mobile device of some sort, but I believe it is best played on the Surface. When you're playing it on the Surface, it feels like you're sitting at a really big table, and the entire experience just kind of pulls you in. It doesn't feel like there's this disconnect, and I really can't explain this any better than the way it feels when you're using real cards to play a game. When you're using the Surface, it doesn't feel like it's a digital screen, it almost feels like you're actually interacting with real physical cards. And that's something that I really don't know if you would get from any other device you could possibly play that game on. But it gets even better, because there are other games out there that feel amazing on this screen. And the best game, the absolute best game I had playing on the Surface was Mini Metro. Now, Mini Metro is a really fun kind of puzzle strategy game that I've been playing a lot of on Steam, and I usually play it with a mouse. But when you play it on the Surface with this huge drafting table design, you feel like you're actually drafting an entire metro system in some urban planning center. It's amazing. It's unlike anything else I've ever experienced before, because unlike any other iPhone or iPad game that I've played, when you're playing Mini Metro on a screen this big, it just completely changes the way you play the game. I know this might sound controversial, but now that I've played these games with this massive touchscreen, I don't think I can go back to playing them any other way. The experience was just that dramatic. It felt amazing and so cool to just be there, going and drafting over cities and taking cards and playing them on the table with Hearthstone. It's just a completely unique thing that is totally because of how big the screen is. Yes, if another company makes a massive touchscreen and you can play the games the exact same way, that's going to be fantastic. But to be able to get the screen to come down and lay on the table like that changes your perspective and makes it feel like an interactive table in front of you. It's just that awesome. But unfortunately, these are about the only experiences you're going to be able to get with this screen. Outside of that, you're not really going to be playing a lot of hardcore games on here because the computer simply isn't really capable of running anything very, very intensive. And for the really big games out there, the modern ones that you could be playing, well, despite the fact that this screen has a massive resolution, that aspect ratio and resolution are gonna work against you. The aspect ratio might not work with a lot of modern games, and the resolution being as big as it is, you're never gonna get really new games to run at that such big resolution because the system is simply not that powerful. So, here are my end thoughts. This is a good computer. It does a lot of things really well, and for a lot of creative types, you might find there's a lot of use out of this thing. But for gamers, unless you've got a lot of money to blow, I don't think you're gonna be wanting to get this thing. Unless you are a huge Hearthstone fan or Mini Metro fan and just want this thing on your table constantly to play those games. And in that case, I would recommend it, but outside of that, this computer simply isn't made for gamers. But as time goes on, and as Microsoft probably makes more of these computers and takes the whole Surface line into new directions, you might find that there are games being released on this platform that may surpass any way that you play them with a mouse and keyboard.